Hey, welcome back to the Work with Soul channel or the Work with Soul blog if you are joining us over on Substack. My name is Monica Rose. I am the founder and the creator of Monica Rose Coaching, and I am your new spiritual work bestie here to help you dismantle toxic work culture in your own life so that you can create a nourishing professional life. So today we are going to talk about toxic work culture, what it is, and the various ways that it can show up in your life. So let's get to it. Just like a human culture, toxic work culture has its own beliefs and values. And it's those beliefs and values that we are very deeply programmed with basically since birth. And those beliefs and values influence our actions. They influence our own beliefs and values, which affect our actions and our decisions, which obviously impacts our entire lives, right? Because our entire lives are nothing, it is nothing but a series of decisions and actions and choices that lead to outcomes over and over again, right? And it's important to understand what toxic work culture is and identify how it shows up, because that identification, that recognition, that acknowledgement is the first step in breaking cycles, right? With work and toxic work culture in your relationship with work and in relationships, pretty much everything in life. First of all, though, I want to distinguish between a toxic work environment and toxic work culture. So, a toxic work environment is what your work environment looks like, right? What you experience every day going to work. And, you know, you probably have experienced a toxic work environment, unfortunately, probably more than one time at more than one job. So you can know already what that looks and feels like. That feeling, the energy of it is also very important. So there's a toxic work environment, which is like on a micro scale. And then there's toxic work culture, which is the macro. Toxic work culture is the collective structure, the collective system of work. And toxic work environments are perpetuated by toxic work culture. The culture enables the environment. So just wanted to do that little aside before we really dive in. I also want to share a couple of my core beliefs around this. One is that toxic work culture is a pillar, so to speak, or a main source of collective conditioning and programming, and particularly burnout. It's no secret that most people, not just in the US where I am, but around the world and other countries, are severely burnt out, which is by intention and design through the matrix, the program, whatever you want to call it. So the majority of people in the collective are severely burnt out. And I believe that the main reason behind that, or the main source of that, is toxic work culture, because toxic work culture has its sticky, gross little fingers in every area of our life. There's not one single area of life, I believe, that toxic work culture does not seep into. Family dynamics, relationship with self, um, spiritual, mental, physical, emotional health, finances, relationships, right? Might be missing some, but those are the main areas of life. And toxic work culture seeps into every single one of those. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that happens. Another one of my core beliefs is that toxic work culture is a spiritual problem. This is I just felt I got chills. There's so much energy behind that statement. Toxic work culture is a spiritual problem. A lot of things, a lot of the collective issues are spiritual problems because, by definition, a spiritual problem is something that tears us away from our authenticity, our uniqueness, our individuality, the core, the essence of who we are, or our spirits, right? Our true nature as individuals. That's our spirit and our soul. Toxic work culture completely separates us from that. We are taught to betray, ignore, neglect our inner knowing, our inner guidance system, all to follow this narrow prescription of what's right or what's admirable or worthy of respect or a living wage, right? And so, by definition, it's a spiritual problem. And this is more of a knowing for me than a belief. But the only true solutions for toxic work culture are spiritual solutions, which is what we are diving into in this Work with Soul channel. This space is spiritual solutions for toxic work culture because it is a spiritual problem. The only true sustainable way to dismantle toxic work culture in your life, it starts with the individual and ripples out into the collective. That's how collective change happens. It all starts at the ground level with the individual. The only way to truly and sustainably dismantle toxic work culture is one individual at a time reclaiming their sovereignty, their spiritual essence, their spirituality through honoring their inner guidance system, because it never ever leads us astray. The program leads us astray intentionally. Our inner guidance system never does. It's just that most of us do not know how to tap into that because we are so caught up in the program. We are so conditioned to ignore every little cue that our body gives us. And that's our intuition, right? We're taught to ignore our own energy flow, our own energetic blueprint. Doesn't matter. It's wrong. Here's this very narrow prescription of what to do. And if you don't succeed, you didn't do something right. You got to follow it exactly. You got to work 40 hours a week at minimum for the next 50, 60, 70 years. You have to go to college, get a degree, but can't really be, it might not be a degree that you like. It has to be a degree that will make you money, even if you hate it, right? You have to do this, this, and this. And what we are seeing since COVID, if you go back to the episode number 1, how COVID is changing the landscape, we see very clearly that people are working much differently now. And people don't want to do that anymore. People don't want to follow that prescription anymore because it doesn't fucking work, right? So, toxic work culture is a main source of collective burnout. And then toxic work culture is a spiritual problem that requires spiritual solutions. And if you stick around in the space, that will make a lot more sense and light bulbs will quickly start to go off for you like, wow, holy shit. This is right, right? This is how I see this coming up in my own life. And once you start acting and living and behaving and deciding and choosing from a place of your own sovereignty, your own inherent worth and value, your own energy, that is when shit really starts to change. And that is spirituality, right? So, what are some ways that, what are some tenets? I'm just going to call them tenets of toxic work culture. What are some beliefs and values of toxic work culture that, and how do they show up for you? The list can go on and on. I could probably talk for hours about this. We can share experiences about this for hours, but we're just going to dive into some examples that are that you I would not be surprised if you've experienced all of these. So, one example is this notion that your inherent or that your worth and value are tied to your job, your title, what you do, and your level of productivity. So if you're a doctor, wow, you save lives, right? You really help people. You are so worthy of this money that you make, of respect. But if you're a cashier at Walmart, you should be doing more with your life. You're kind of failing, right? If you're in your 30s or 40s and you work at McDonald's, you're just a failure. Obviously, I don't mean that. I don't mean this. But that's what we are told, right? That's the dynamic going on there, which is obviously total bullshit. And then your worth and your value as an employee and a human are tied to your level of productivity. So the more you sell of something, the more you produce of something, you deserve 19, 18, $15 an hour, whatever they're paying you. But if you're not producing, meeting quotas and whatever, you don't deserve higher pay. You don't deserve respect. You don't deserve anything good, right? You have to keep working harder, 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 work more hours, right? And a way that that can show up in our personal lives or in your personal life is you have a hard time resting or slowing down. You might feel really restless or anxious in the evenings when you're not at work anymore or on the weekends. You don't really actually chill ever. There's always something to do, right? That's a very common experience. Another example is, I just had a bunch right at the tip of my brain. Oh, another example is that talking about pay is taboo. You shouldn't talk about pay with your coworkers. And that leads to unethical, unfair wage gaps or new employees being hired at a higher wage than what you make and you've been there for 5 years, 10 years, a year, right? And you don't know this because nobody talks about it. And that leads to fear of asking hard questions, asking for a raise, right? It makes talking about that so uncomfortable that you just avoid it altogether. Another example is um, hmm, there's so many, like just trying to decide which ones to come up, which ones want to come up. Oh, another example is you have to accept disrespect, abuse at work from your bosses or from your coworkers. Got to avoid that conflict. You got to be quiet about it. Just deal with it because it's just work, right? It's just work when you spend 8+ hours a day with the same people, at least 40 hours a week. Even if it's part time, you're spending a significant amount of time with these people. So you just got to keep the peace. Abusive bosses is a very common experience, unfortunately. At almost every job that I've had, even as recent as last year in 2022, I have had an abusive boss. And we're taught to just take it on the chin, you know, don't defend ourselves. How many people do you know or have you heard of, or maybe you personally, that have not said anything, not defended themselves, not reported somebody out of fear of losing your job or not getting a promotion or not getting a raise, right? That's fucked up. And in our personal lives, that can show up like we just totally dissolve boundaries. We have no boundaries in our relationships, right? We just accept bottom of the barrel breadcrumb behavior from people in our lives that we're in connection with just to avoid the conflict. And then we go our whole lives without ever defending ourselves, without maintaining boundaries, without even knowing what our boundaries need to be, right? Because we are so afraid of that conflict. We need to keep these people around, right? There's a lot wrapped up in that. It's very layered. Hmm. Another example is when you have a job interview, you don't really ask the questions. You're the one being interviewed. You have to sell yourself to this potential employer. What I say is you are interviewing them. They should be the ones selling themselves to you. You might need a job, even desperately, maybe, but they need you more at the end of the day. Maybe not you specifically, but they need their employees more. And that's something that I will be talking about more as time goes on. These harder job skills, like how to interview, what questions to ask somebody who's interviewing you, right? Mm. So, a way that that can show up in your personal life is kind of goes back with the avoiding hard conversations, avoiding conflict, and really being afraid of speaking up for yourself. being afraid of stating exactly what you need because you're afraid of rejection, you don't believe that you're worthy of it. Another example is a complete lack of appreciation, just not showing employees that they're appreciated. Pizza parties don't fucking count. Like, fuck off with your goddamn pizza party. Like, tell me that you appreciate me. Give me a fucking bonus, right? We don't really understand how powerful appreciation is in the workplace. Appreciation has the power to completely change a work environment, to completely change how somebody shows up to work. My job right now is so incredibly supportive. Like almost every day, somebody tells me they appreciate me. Just today, on June 7th, 2023, before I left, my supervisor, she said, "Thanks for everything you did today. I really appreciate you." And I was like, wow, like that never gets old. And it still kind of hits me like, whoa, like I am not used to that. You're not worthy of respect. You're not valuable unless you meet these certain conditions. You can work your ass off for your boss, and they never tell you that they appreciate you. That lack of acknowledgement is very damaging. It's very harmful. And it's traumatic, right? It makes us question ourselves. And how that can show up in our personal lives is that we are constantly seeking validation from other people. Am I valuable? Do you appreciate me? Right? It's very hurtful. Another example is a lack of communication, lack of transparency, this lack of trust between your employer and you as an employee. They don't do what they say they're going to do, right? Or maybe they're just straight up like shady. Maybe they play favorites. That's very common too, unfortunately. And how that can show up in your personal life is you have a hard time trusting other people, right? Some of this might seem a little like, duh, but it's really important to make the association between what you experience in your life and your relationship with work and toxic work culture. Because when you put a name to it, it takes the power away. And you can say, oh, wow, I don't actually own this. This actually is not mine. And then you can truly work to dissolve and dismantle it. So there are some examples, there's many more. And if you stick around in this space, follow me on Instagram, subscribe to the newsletter, read the blog, tune back here in the channel. We're going to talk more and more and more about this. So if this resonated with you, if you have experienced any of this in your own life and relationship with work, leave a comment below the video, leave a comment on the blog post if you're over on Substack. Find me on Instagram at Monica Rose Coaching. Tune in over there. Let's start a conversation and let's burn shit down. Love you.